Reimagine India series, we engage with members of parliament from across party lines and across geographies of India. Today, we are honored to have Shri Gaurav Gogoi, honorable member of parliament and an enigmatic young leader who's been kind supporter of FICCI Forum of Parliament initiatives in the past also. I'm pleased to welcome our panel today, Dr. Joshna Suri, past president FICCI and chairperson, and Mr. Neotia, again past president FICCI and chairperson Ambuja Neotia Group. They have been mentors and deep patrons for our FICCI Forum of Parliamentarian, which is a track to initiative to engage with our parliamentarians and their counterparts overseas on trade, economic, and of course geopolitical issues. FICCI, of course, has a long-standing partnership with Konrad Adenauer Stiftung across various aspects of our work. This is one of the areas where we are always privileged to partner with CAS. And from CAS, we have Mr. Peter Rimmel and Mr. Pankaj Madan, who's the head of programs based in India, with us today. So without much ado, I would request Mr. Peter Rimmel, the resident representative of CAS in India, to set the tone for today and get the ball rolling. Mr. Peter Rimmel.
Okay, thank you, Manish. Can I be heard? So allow me also to extend a warm welcome to our esteemed guest, Mr. Gaurav Gogoi, and of course everybody else joining us today. I'm very much looking forward to this keynote speech and the ensuing debate. As Konrad Adenauer Foundation has been working with FICCI for quite some time, Manish just mentioned it, it is perhaps safe to say that these debates usually prove thought-provoking and stimulating, especially when featuring a guest of such renown. COVID-19 has changed the trajectory of diplomacy, politics, economy, and not to forget our everyday life. Only slowly do we begin to understand the sheer extent of these changes. Yet, at least in some parts, adaptation to the new circumstances was quicker than we commonly give us credit for. Where it is possible, most of us are now working from home, like in the moment. Digital services have become commonplace, and the social behavior of large parts of humanity has reacted remarkably well to the rules of the pandemic. However, adaptation is a survival skill and does not nullify the deadly effects of the virus. COVID-19 is still there and will stay for quite some time. What I have seen from the American virus specialist, he just noted that we will not have a normal life till the end of 2021, according to his expertise. Apart from its direct threat to public and individual health, nowhere its impact is felt more profoundly than in the economic sector. We have only just started to feel the profound impact of the virus left on the global economy. In international trade, for example, COVID-19 has taught us a harsh but also valuable lesson. Nothing is forever. Within just a few months, the production of goods had come to a standstill, and the major trade arteries that fuel our domestic consumption have been cut off. We have suddenly realized just how dependent we are on our neighbors or even countries we never really considered. Their fate has become our fate. A production shop in China produces shockwaves that will be felt in India and in Germany. So, economic self-reliance, or Atmanirbharta, as Prime Minister Modi called it, I believe is a possible solution or a contribution to a solution to this vulnerability. It's understandable that at a time when we're all preoccupied with momentous challenges facing the basic tenets of our societies, we turn more inward in search of solutions. Especially for strategic resources, for example in the health sector, independence from foreign suppliers is in order, and that is true for India as well as for Germany. But self-reliance in a globalized world is different from autarky, and we need to remember that. In a changing world where cooperation between countries becomes more difficult and compromise gives way to confrontation, we have to rely on others, no matter how big and how powerful we are. Stronger we are always when we are together. But it's not just international trade that has been disrupted. I have alluded to the service sector already. Entire sectors of the economy have digitized quasi overnight. Only online appointments with your doctor, e-learning via Zoom at schools, online grocery shopping, e-banking, every day a new idea comes up. The driving force there is obviously necessity. People and their business need to survive somehow. In that regard, let me say that this way clearly, India is probably ahead of Germany. We can be proud of many things, but an ability to adapt quickly to change is not one of them. And I guess that would apply for the German administration as well as for the Indian one. But even those mindsets had to accept the new normal that was thrust upon us in March. Most gastronomy has switched to takeout service with the added bonus that this has created some valuable competition in a rather monotonous market. The opposite is unfortunately true for retail. I've already mentioned like Amazon, Alibaba, their stronghold on the online market is unfortunately such that it is extremely difficult for smaller businesses to break through. At least that's the case for Germany. So this change is challenging for consumers, but it is even more challenging for small enterprises. Overnight, entire business models had to change wholesale to survive in an economy under duress. For some, this changed market provided an opportunity to finally break out of a mold and to chart ingenious new courses. But for others, and we know that, and lots of them are members of FICI, it provided nothing but difficulty and hardship. So let me return to the theme of economic self-reliance in here. What is true for the nation state is equally true for the individual. We're stronger together and vulnerable alone. Entrepreneurial zeal and survival skills need to be commended, but they cannot be expected from everyone. The economic model of the post COVID 19 future, and whenever that future may be, must take these differences and the difficulty of disruptive change into account. A crisis such as ours can all too easily become an exercise in Darwinism, survival of the fittest. We should not let that happen. People are social beings, so a social approach is much more difficult to finance and to legitimize under the pressure of a crisis. But in the long run, we all benefit from it. With that, I'd like to close my opening remarks and look forward to today's keynote speech. Thank you very much. Back to you, Manish.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for always setting the tone very elegantly all the time. I request Dr. Joshna Suri to introduce Shri Gogoi and share her remarks. Thank you.
Shri Gaurav Gogoi, Mr. Harshvardhan Neotia, Peter Remel, all participants of the webinar, Namaskar, and a very warm welcome to the Reimagine India series. This bipartisan forum hosts leaders across party lines with the intent for them to share their ideas for India's greater glory. For those who may not be aware, I want to give a little background about this, about the Forum of Parliamentarians, which was initiated by FICI in the year 2000. And it was done as a track two platform for MPs to discuss important issues of national and global relevance. It went into a hiatus, and I am really pleased to share that during my presidency in 2015, I resurrected this forum to be a voice for parliamentarians in the world's largest democracy. Shri Bhupender Yadav ji, who's a member of Rajya Sabha, and the National General Secretary of BJP, is the chair of the forum, and Harsh Neotia is my extremely capable co-chair. The forum, which is very, very close to my heart, has actually witnessed continuous interactions between Indian MPs with peers from UK, Japan, US, Germany, and many more. In the current situation of the global pandemic, we have adapted to the virtual connect. And today's discussion is a part of a series of exclusive virtual conversations with members of parliament. Previous speakers have been Sri Bhupendra Yadav himself, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Mr. Derek O'Brien, and Srimati Poonam Mahajan. So with great pleasure, I introduce our key speaker for today, Shri Gaurav Gogoi, Honorable Member of Parliament from the state of Assam. He is a two-time Member of Parliament and Deputy Party Whip of the Indian National Congress Party in the Lok Sabha. He is also the party in charge for several important states, Sikkim, West Bengal, Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and Manipur. In 2015, he was accorded the Young Global Leader from India by the World Economic Forum. Sri Gogoi is a youth leader and an advocate for people's rights and development of the Northeast. He is deeply involved in social work, promotion of cultural events like the Brahmaputra Festival, and developing sports facilities for the youth. He has represented India in several outreach programs, but most importantly, he is a great support for the FICCI Forum of Parliamentarians. This COVID pandemic has redefined the personal, political, and economic ecosystem. We would like to know from you or hear from you, Sri Gaurav Gogoiji, on how you think India can reimagine and redefine itself to emerge stronger from this crisis. Over to you, Mr. Gogoi, and once again, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Suri, for that very warm introduction. Very warm welcome to Dr. Neotia, Peter. Very good to see Manish and Dilip as well. And first of all, I hope that there is not a fatigue which is already set in all your minds of these virtual conferences. I assume that after a week of work, the last thing you want to do on a Saturday is another virtual conference. Nonetheless, the idea of reimagining India is exciting, and one that I'm sure all of you are already charting in your respective fields, in your respective sectors as well. I do agree with Peter on one point that prior to the setting in of COVID, the world was seeing an increased momentum towards deglobalization, and many nations were beginning to withdraw from international commitments and beginning to think more inwards. The health crisis in COVID has allowed us to again awaken to the importance of global connectivity and of a global common leadership when it comes to fighting global challenges such as COVID and other such challenges in the future as well. But there have been certain trends which were setting in prior to COVID, increased nationalism being one of them, and I think that has deepened. But what is more exciting for me or interesting for me is that all the people who are attending today's panel are very passionate about India. I've interacted with you on various occasions, and I've always noticed your deep commitment at a personal, professional, and at a spiritual level to the Indian growth story. That's something that I also share. And even prior to COVID, I was thinking broadly about this concept of reimagining India. While COVID might prove to be an obstacle for our growth for the next year and a half or 2 years, eventually we will move past this phase as India and the world has moved past in previous challenges. So I'm confident of a post-COVID world, and I'm confident that again we will again work with all our passion and all our dreams in making an India a stronger and a much more powerful country. And it's in this context that I was thinking about reimagining India as a leading Asian power. And I choose these words carefully: leading, Asian, and power. For many decades, India's demographic advantages, its economic growth post 1991, its strategic importance post the 2008 US India Civil Nuclear Treaty has attracted global attention, and the world had always demanded more from India on global issues. Yet, we, those of us who are working within the Indian ecosystem are much too aware of the challenges that we face. That when you have a country of 1.2 billion people, with 800 million people who are living close, who are not in the middle income segment, when you have development inequalities across the states, while the global platform awaits us, we have much to do within as well. But at the same time, I do feel that it is necessary to have a goal and to have a target in mind, therefore, by which we can evaluate on a year basis that are we moving closer to our goal of becoming a leading Asian power, or we are still stuck in terms of where we are. But I'm, the role of industry, I feel, is extremely important. The industry has taken a hit during COVID. That's not a surprise. But at the same time, we do realize that our economy was doing poorly and not per our expectations even prior to COVID. We had successive quarters of performance that we are not too happy with. We've had major legislative reforms such as the GST and the cut in corporate tax rates, but the subsequent effect that should have taken place on private sector investment, on bank credit, that we have not seen. So we are operating in a dichotomy where India rises up in the ease of doing business in the world rankings, and at the same time, private investment seems to be stagnant. And if you look at the recent economic data, it is for the good performance of the agricultural sector, thanks to a good monsoon, that the Indian GDP is where it is. Had we had a bad monsoon, I think we would be in a much poorer state. Nonetheless, we must focus on reforming the Indian economic and financial sector, not only for the domestic investors, but also for foreign investors. There's much to do in the financial sector in terms of cleaning up. We've had former RBI governors talk about this, and all of you who are much more deeply engaged with the financial sector are much more aware of what the solutions need to be. But why I do bring the financial sector up is that our priorities need to be identified and our priorities need to be elucidated clearly. I don't feel as if there is any merit in pretending as if there is no problem or as if we are back to seeing very good days or seeing double digit growth. We are in a difficult position, and we should realize that the financial sector is one of the areas where we have to work in. Being working with and speaking to a lot of industrialists and entrepreneurs in the Northeast, I also realize the challenges that we face in a complex regulatory framework. The different licenses, the amount of difficulty it takes, whether to set up a business or to expand a business. So, therefore, I think there's a lot to do when it comes to working with new domestic as well as larger entrepreneurs when it comes to expanding their business. At the same time, Well, I do feel that the summits that we have been doing, the Investment India summits and similar business summits that various state governments are beginning to do over the last few decades, we must look at state governments from a very different point of view. I'm glad that the GST Council has shown that chief ministers belonging to different political parties can sit together along with the ruling dispensation, along with the central government, to have a common tax platform. Surely we can reimagine uh, a common chief ministers forum or a common leadership council when it comes to improving, uh, bringing in the necessary reforms within every state so as to ease the investment. Therefore, the necessary to focus on state governments to improve the capacity of state officers, and also we must allow state government the freedom to pursue both domestic as well as foreign investment. I don't see at this stage why a state like Tamil Nadu or a state like Karnataka or a state like Maharashtra cannot have its own trade council representative in the Indian High Commission to the UK or to in the Indian Embassy in the US. Surely some of our states which are have traditionally seen a lot of interest both from the private sector, domestic and international, should be given the freedom to pursue those investments through a much more organized manner. Often, in my experience, I find that it is has been largely on the back of chief ministers who have gone outside, who have pursued, who have met global investors and have come back. But it remains at a very personal level. It remains at the level of the chief minister. And once you've had the meeting with the chief minister, in order to get the work done, in order to get the files moving or the permissions, there is still a lot of work to be done. So I think it is very necessary as a step of reimagining India is to give states more freedom, more autonomy, even think of ideas such as having the states open up their own trade council representatives or office in Indian embassies and high commissions abroad. At the same time, looking back within, one of the key metrics that when it comes to industry is the number of jobs that are being created. There is a certain sense of worry with technology, automation, 3D printing. What happens to the number of jobs? We do know that new jobs do get created in a new technological era, but we are, the worry is not the nature of the job. The worry is in terms of the number of jobs, and therefore it's very essential that even now, where we sit, where we are in our current stage of our economic roadmap, we look at the sectors which create the which create the maximum number of jobs, and we look at what those sectors need and help those sectors reform, help those sectors grow big. So sectors like the textile sector, the garment sector, uh, manufacturing, healthcare technology, uh, oil, mines, and mobiles, electric car, and automobile. These are industries which employ lakhs of people. And these are the sectors which I feel need a lot of attention because each sector has the potential to become bigger, but they need sectoral wise focus, they need sectoral wise attention, and they need sectoral wise reforms. And therefore, I think we must prioritize that which are the top 10 job creating livelihood sectors within India right now. And we must have a mission like zeal in order to improve our performance in those sectors so that we can employ more people. I'm happy that the world is looking towards India in a new way, especially after the world as tensions with China rise. This was happening pre-COVID as well, with the rising tension between US and China. Unfortunately, at that time, Vietnam and countries like Japan seem to be taking more advantage of the growing rift. But at least now, I feel in a post-COVID world, if we have to reimagine India, India has to be that much more ambitious and aggressive in order to bring small-scale manufacturing firms to set up their base in India. At the same time, COVID has exposed how much more investment in healthcare we need. If we go by the experience of AIDS, where the Indian generic drugs industry is lauded across the world for its ability to provide drugs at a affordable price and make it accessible. I think COVID has again taught us that we need to ramp up our efforts and our investment in healthcare so we become a hub for exports in pharmaceuticals. And there are so many attractive markets that exist in the world today, such as countries in South Asia, Africa, Middle East, Eastern Europe, and Latin America. So we must, when we talk about focusing on investment, focusing on startups, it is not only in the technological IT or artificial intelligence, but I feel it's necessary to to help startups and MSMEs in the pharmaceutical space and the generic medicine space as well. And there's again a lot of work to be done when it comes to helping these firms with making simple things like registration, recognition, and access to funding much more easier. So here are the sectors which are important. Here are various wheels in the governance mechanism, such as the state government, that needs to be thought about. At the same time, we have to look at the world as well, and look at how we engage our diplomatic efforts in order to push forward India's national interests and economic interests as well. And in my personal opinion, what I have found over the last couple of years is that India's diplomatic attention has been, or in terms of our capacity over the last many years, has been cornered by the major global powers, especially the US. But I feel that we need to understand that the world is a much larger place, and we have to look at other countries as well from a diplomatic point of view in order to promote our own economic and strategic interest. And therefore, I feel Europe is a region where Indian diplomacy has not done it enough. And especially within Europe, there are four countries that I like to prioritize, which is Germany, France, Netherlands, Belgium. Um, uh, Sorry, there are five countries: Germany, France, Netherlands, Belgium, and Austria. Because with all these five countries, there is technology, there's potential of defense relationships, there's the potential of cybersecurity, there's the potential on maritime cooperation and energy as well. So with Germany, France, especially these two countries, I feel are much more important nations when it comes to, you know, fulfilling our ambitions in the technological space and the manufacturing space. We've already seen how France is emerging to be a key partner in our defense industry, and I think that would already continue. But while we focus on Europe, while we continue our relationship with the US, we have to look at our neighborhood as well. And here is where we need to do much more. I come from the Northeast, in which Assam is the biggest state compared to the six other states. And I know how smaller states feel when there is one big state which is a neighbor to them. Then the big state is often looked upon as a big brother and someone who superimposes their will, someone who overwhelms the interests of the smaller states. And often, when I speak to my counterparts in our neighbors, such as Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, often India is looked upon as the big brother. But sometimes the big brother can be taken in a positive connotation, and sometimes it can be taken in a slight negative connotation. So the statements that have come from our neighbors post CAA, Citizenship Amendment Act, and the NRC from Bangladesh, who is a key ally, should be given more importance. We should focus a lot more in building diplomatic efforts and the personal outreach with the heads of states, with countries like Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Nepal, Myanmar, Afghanistan as well. The Prime Minister's office has followed a hyper energetic diplomacy. We've seen the Prime Minister jet set across the world, meeting leaders, and we've seen a new focus when it comes to prime ministerial level visits with the Middle East. But the same vigor needs to be brought in within the neighborhood, within the South Asian neighborhood, at the prime ministerial office level, at the same time with the larger Southeast Asian region as well. And I must say there is a disappointment that while the world is calling upon India to be a member of the global economic framework, the withdrawal of India from the regional comprehensive economic RCEP partnership was not looked upon favorably. It did not, the withdrawal did not contribute to the global image of India as a rising power. In fact, it contributed to the image that India is still not ready because there is so much domestic reform that are required, and our domestic industries need so much more aid that we are yet to be able to be a member of a framework such as the RCEP, take on the challenges that no doubt it brings. But I feel at some point we will have to grow within so ourselves and eventually look at joining RCEP as well. Goes without saying that with a country like China, which is having its expansionist view, our relationship with Japan, South Korea, Australia is much more important, and we are seeing that in the defense and maritime space. We will always be in a conflict prone region. We will always have Pakistan on one side, on China on the other side. That cannot be wished away. That physical proximity, the advantages, and more importantly, the threats that it brings cannot be wished away. And especially with a country like China, where it's often viewed as the relationship between India and China is viewed as a relationship between the elephant versus the dragon. Both the elephant and the dragon will have to tread very carefully, but at the same time protect their self-interest, their territory extremely aggressively, because in both cases, even a small step on the other's territory sends a big signal. And I feel where we are right now in the military standoff with China, it's a crucial moment because China, all of you have seen, not only with respect to India, but with respect to Hong Kong, with respect to Japan, with respect to Philippines, it is using this moment of global pandemic as a way of asserting itself, and its incremental approach is a trademark Chinese playbook, and therefore I think the government of India needs to escalate this, and the people of India needs to realize that this is not just about a few kilometers in a mountainous terrain. It is a much larger game at play. I don't want to speak for too much. I do want to hear all of you as well, because all of you have been dealing with all these issues that I have raised on a much more closer level, on a much more interpersonal level, and all of you have deeply thought about this as well. So I don't want to go on for too long, only to say that today, in every crisis, there's an opportunity. We must use this crisis as an opportunity. We must understand that the realities have changed, but at the same time, we must go back to the drawing board. I do feel that this government, with its huge political mandate, with its huge popularity, could have done much more in the last 6 years, which would have, in today's time, acted as an insurance against the economic impact of COVID, which in today's time would have acted as a buffer uh, against the negative impact of COVID. But the last 6 years, the amount of goodwill, the amount of comparative advantages they had, I don't think were utilized to its potential. And therefore, you've seen whether it comes to COVID, whether it comes to unemployment data and the GDP data, India remains an outlier. Should not have been this case. And therefore, I do only hope that all of us collectively go back to the drawing board, because together we all have a common aim of India being a global power, India being an Asian power in terms of our the way we think about power is a very Asian framework. It's not in the Western framework. We think about power in a very Asian and especially in a very deeply Indian manner. But nonetheless, power is what India has to strive for, whether it's, and therefore focusing on economy, focusing on the capacity of our governance and the ability of governments to deliver both at the central and the state, and the ability to engage with countries both within Asia but outside Asia, within Europe and other continents. I think these are very critical pieces, and industry plays a very strong role. Industries which are innovative, in the technology, healthcare space, but also industries which employ and creates thousands of jobs, such as textiles, garments, oils, mines, and other commodities. So with that, I would like to end with words of gratitude for giving me this opportunity to share some of the thoughts. As Dr. Suri rightly said, that often as we parliamentarians would like to share our thoughts in such a forum, but neither the parliament nor the election going states allow us to share these thoughts in the manner that we want to. So I'm grateful that such a forum of parliamentarians exists, where all of our parliamentarians, where we've worked together in standing committees, we've gone outside on foreign delegations as well. This is a forum which allows us to put our collective intellectual power, brain power together. Thank you very much, and I hope that all of you stay safe.
So, thank you. Gaurav, this is Harsh Neotia. Warm welcome to you from my behalf. A very warm welcome to Mr. Peter Remel, Mr. Pankaj Madan, Dr. Suri, Dilip, and Team Fiki. Thank you very much. So I will ask a few questions, Gaurav, if you permit, and then I will hand over to Dilip because there might be some questions coming into our chat box. So he'll take it up from there. First of all, congratulations on being nominated as the Deputy Chief Whip. I don't know what it exactly means. Whip for us is usually a lashing that you get in college when you are a naughty boy.
Well,
So
it's a
are you?
deputy leader now. So I was a deputy whip earlier,
Oh,
but in the
okay.
recent last week's change, it's a deputy leader of the party in Lok Sabha now.
So on
So
a lighter note, you don't have to.
I don't have the privilege of whipping anyone.
Oh, so that's wonderful. So congratulations on being the deputy leader. Uh, I would start with the first question that your state, the Assam, is going in for elections early next year. How do you see these various agitations that had happened just prior to uh, the COVID lockdown, etc., panning out? And what do you think is happening on the ground in Assam? And how do you think the elections will it A be held on time? What do you feel? And how do you think things will pan out?
Uh, Thanks, Harshji. First of all, the elections will be held on time. Secondly, the protests that you're talking about were in relationship to the Citizenship Amendment Act and the National Register of Citizens. And I must say that those two, um, that period of protest has completely changed uh, the political reality in Assam and the way people think about politics, especially with respect to various parties. So like you say, there's a pre-COVID era and a post-COVID era. Similarly, there's a pre-CAA political reality in Assam and a post-CAA political reality in Assam. I could get into details, but I think that's better for a offline discussion. But right now, as Peter said in his opening remarks as well, even people within Assam, they're just struggling with the economic impact of the lockdown. I speak to farmers who are unable to get who get the grains lifted and the paddy lifted off from their farms. I speak to mill owners who have no commodities entering their mills. I speak to people who do livestock farming or rear fish for a living, and they're not getting the markets. I'm speaking at the level of where Assam's economy is. So our livelihoods have been hit very badly. A lot of migrant labor moved back to Assam from South India. They were unable to find jobs which held them back in Assam, so they've moved back to South India. So right now, people are just feeling the pinch. They are fighting the second wave in terms of COVID cases. At the same time, they're fighting the economic impact. They're worried about the children going to schools. So traditional politics is a bit far from their head. Right now, they're just struggling on a day-to-day basis, to survive that month. or to have enough money to pay for the salaries and household expenses for the next month.
Thank you. Another question, when we see these COVID graph rising all across India, one of the things one has noticed that Assam has been able to somewhat not get into the more sort of tricky areas and be somewhat better able to manage the situation. Can you tell us why it has been so, or is there anything special that Assam did to see that the COVID graph has not been as bad as in many other states and most of the states of India?
Thanks, Ash. Again, not so good news to share here. The fact is that from March till August, Assam was doing quite well compared to other states. And I can say that both from my personal anecdotal experiences as well as what the data says. But I think from August onwards, Assam has joined the other states like Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and on a daily basis, we have close to 2,300 new cases, while the rest of the states in Northeast India are still in a much safer space. But Assam has joined the category, you could almost say the yellow category of states, where the numbers are not as high as Maharashtra or as Tamil Nadu, but on a daily basis, the trend is worrying. We've had the government say in the past that they had hoped that by 15th August or by August, the cases would go down. The government only recently has revised the figures and say that it's likely to get worse for the next 3 months.
Okay, taking this forward, the parliament is to open in a few days, and this is going to be a very, very unprecedented parliament with all sorts of restrictions. Uh, how do you see? I mean, obviously, as a deputy leader, you would have got some knowledge as to how parliament will be conducted. We are reading that question hour and zero hour, etc., have been curtailed, and therefore opposition voice is to somewhat not going to be much heard. And also, it is a short parliament with limited hours because I think you're sharing the central hall. So, looking at all of this, how do you see the legislative process in the monsoon session going forward?
Thank you, Harsh. As you know, the Parliament, especially the monsoon session, normally takes place in the third week of July and goes on to August. So, first of all, this is a delayed session. But at the same time, many countries across the world held their Parliament sessions on time, had their standing committee meetings, whether in person or through virtual. So, India, while we claim to be the largest democracy in the world, while we claim to be a shining example of democracy, I personally felt that we didn't do the right thing by pushing our parliament session. And like the other countries, we should have found a way, like the way that we've done now, these methods that we've put in for a safe discussion of bills in the upcoming parliament session. The same methods could have been brought in the July era as well. And by not having standing committee for a long time, I think just again shows, just raises important questions that, you had chief ministerial level virtual meetings on GST, on handling COVID, but standing committee meetings were not meeting virtually. You know, that's another troubling question. So a delayed parliament question, uh, a delayed parliament session, and then you're having these standing committees which are also delayed. They are working now, but they were again delayed. And then when you finally have the parliament session, you are extending the parliament to work on Saturdays and Sundays, but at the same time you're curbing fundamental things like question hour. Now, what is the role of the legislator? It is to question the executive, and especially at a time where we're facing an economic crisis, a health crisis, a national security crisis, where people are suffering in our states. So the very idea of doing away with question hour, I thought, was outrageous. Our party raised this issue. So while we've not got the question hour in its original concept of having a verbal question and a verbal, spontaneous reply from the minister. What we at least have got is that we are written our questions to the government, and the government will be submitting their answers. Even zero hour, which is the space for individual MPs to raise matters of importance in their constituency, that was initially taken away. But again, after our party persisting, we managed to have, if not a 30-minute zero hour instead of the 60-minute zero hour. So I think these are all worrying signs that the COVID pandemic and the COVID health crisis is being used by various governments to only strengthen the executive at the cost of weakening the legislative.
One more thing that we noticed, and we all saw the plight of the migrants just when the lockdown was announced. So, going forward, now that was unfortunate and that we did have to see those sites. But going forward, what do you think as a nation? Should we have some kind of a social security for workers? What should we actually be a long term strategy for India from an economic standpoint, particularly for the poor and the unorganized sector, which seem to have been very badly impacted and still continue to be badly impacted?
Thanks, Harsh. What I see is, during the COVID response, a huge, glaring inequality in the way, how governments responded in rural India and how governments responded in urban India. In rural India, we had our social welfare mechanisms, the public distribution system, which kicked in immediately, and the rations and necessary food rations flowed to the people at the time. We also had a governance structure in terms of our Panchayati Raj system, which really acted at the village council level as as representatives of the people and helped those people in need and help the local administration both in terms of quarantine norms as well as identifying those who are needy and giving them the necessary support system. And even now, through the MGNREGA and through the development funds that village council receives, many people in rural India are getting involved in part-term livelihood opportunities. The same cannot be said that of urban India. We've had pockets of people who are not getting the necessary food. I had to help many such people with access to food rations. All the people that I've helped, all the calls of distress I've got are all from people living in different parts of urban India. So while we talk about urbanization, this experience has just shown the glaring hole that exists when it comes to distributing social welfare to urban poor, urban migrant poor, and that has been and that shows that what we need is similar to the panchayat system. We need a much more um bottom down, decentralized governance system in urban India as well. Somehow, even though we have ward commissioners and municipality commissioners, I think a lot of people, especially the migrant labor, were falling through the cracks. And I think that's something to focus on in the future.
Thank you, Gaurav. That's all from me. So over to Dilip in case you have any questions.
No, thank you. I think there's a question from Ms. Nana Lal Kidwai. She has a hand up. And next, I think Peter has a question. And Chetan, can you make Pranab Joshi wants to ask a question? Can you make him a participant so he can ask the question directly? So first, Naina, please.
Thank you, Dilip, and always such a delight to hear you, Gauravji. So articulate and the vast canvas that you've painted, and actually with a very balanced approach. So thank you for leaving us with rays of hope as well. I wanted to really ask you to comment on the issues around climate change, pollution, and wildlife, all three areas of which you have been very prominent in, whether it's dharnas in parliament or tabling issues on these fronts. And the question really to you is, going forward, how do you see the role of Parliament and people like yourselves in broadening India's agenda on these very critical issues, climate change, pollution, and wildlife?
Thank you, Nenaji. Likewise, always good to see you. I hope everyone in the family is doing well.
Very well. Rashid's listening in, actually. There's no way he's going to miss an opportunity to hear you.
Please convey my regards to him as well.
Yeah.
So let me give you the easier answer first. Do I see the role of Parliament in what do I see the role of Parliament in issues of climate change and uh, let's say the ecology? My experience, Nenaji, is that the role of legislator, the Parliament, and legislation over the past many decades from various governments has come down considerably. At the same time, environment, climate change, and ecology are issues of importance to both the central and the national government. But in contrast to Europe, where a lot of transformation happens through legislation, or in the US, where a lot of changes and impact is created by legislation, that is not the case in India when it comes to environment. It is not legislation that is pushing our work. Most of our legislation have been signed in the 80s and are still in operation now. So the Environmental Protection Act is from the 80s. The Air Act and the Water Act, which are the two basic acts in environment and in environment protection, are from the 80s and therefore are outdated. But at the same time, you also know that we've been pushing a lot of work through the solar mission. We've been pushing a lot of work through the automobile industry towards, focusing towards the electric car industry. So I think when it comes to environment and ecology, it is about the executive pushing forward the the, the schemes and the programs, and making incentivizing the industry to be towards a much more greener and economic, ecologically sensitive India. Even in clean air, there is no new legislation. I've been asking for a new legislation for clean air, but there's still a program, an executive program called the National Clean Air Program, that the government of India has introduced and is not thinking so much about reforming our legislation, which is completely different from my experience, the American and the European way. To the first question, which is the much more philosophical question, is what do we do with the environment and the climate crisis that we face in? And I must say, in India and in countries like India, where there's so many people living in poverty, environment cannot be delinked from livelihood. The way in COVID we have said that health, it cannot be a health versus livelihood option. This is the same framework and the same approach in when it comes to environment. For the sake of environment, we cannot cut jobs. At the same time, we cannot think about jobs uh, without ignoring while ignoring the environment. So they have to both go hand in hand, and therefore we have to look at a lot of traditional industries and think about new economic models, so that the reality in which we live in, which is people need access to technology, people in states needs access to credit, people in rural India needs access to markets, and how technology can be a great leveler, is what I think is required. So a new economic way of thinking, in which we bring livelihoods and the environment together. So it's not a either or a us versus them. It's taking both taking both along.
I think thank you for that. And I suppose when one looks at wildlife and forest conservation, exactly what you say, engagement of communities in the activities around where they live, when they live around forests, is something that Assam has done very well. And I hope can be replicated elsewhere. But thank you for that response, Gaurav. We need people like you to be our environment minister, which I hope happens in due course. So please keep fighting for these causes. Thank you.
I hope Vicky would still invite me if I become an environment.
Oh no, industry is a big friend of things to do with the environment. In fact, industry embraces the right causes of environment. So no, we're not on opposite sides.
But I must say, just to, because I do get this opportunity, I would, through this forum, would invite people from the industry to be champions of clean air and the need for clean air. I think we're hearing a lot of voices from academia. We're hearing a lot of voices from the health sector in terms of the negative impacts of the polluted air that many, not just Delhi, Bombay, but many of our children and families are being exposed to in cities and towns across India. The National Clean Air Program compiles a list of 100 cities and towns which is vulnerable to air pollution. So the role of industries, both the big and the small, is important. And I do understand that industries sometimes need help as well in order to adapt to a much more environment-friendly solution. But I think it's necessary for these kind of conversations to happen more.
Peter, would you like to go next with your question? Peter?
Yes, then I go ahead. Thanks, Dilip. Well, I could not agree more with you, Gaurav, on the position India should be more ambitious, maybe even more aggressive of supporting more business, startups and what on. So I noticed the political will is there, but that's only one side. It may not be enough. At the same time, you mentioned how difficult it is to start a new enterprise, to get the necessary permits and so on and so on. So that seems to be contradictions to me. The question is, does it have to be that difficult? What could be done that on the implementation level, the results are coming up of having more SMEs and more companies starting? If it's so difficult for Indians, how much more difficult is it for foreign investors, what you mentioned you want to have? So that's one question. The other thing I'd like to mention, you said the diplomacy should make more efforts on having business and investment on its platform. Let me just mention that in the case of Germany, it's happening. Next week on Wednesday will be the 5th Indo-German Business Dialogue organized by the Indian Embassy in Germany, together with Mr. Mark Hauptmann, a German member of parliament. And that one, Mrs. Reddy, the current president of FICCI, will be one of the panelists on that thing. Our foundation is also supporting it with a side event. So that is happening, what you mentioned there. But back to my question. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. So there are two parts to your question. The first part, I must say, there has been a change in India when it comes to approaching, when it comes to the way we view business. You must understand that in the traditional Indian history, business and the business community was not looked upon favorably by the Indian society. It, and that's something that many countries showed. Over the past many decades, at society, people have accepted business as a very important part of the economic story. While people have accepted business for many decades, political parties and the political approach towards business was again viewed with a very negative mindset, with a view of command and control, especially through licenses and permits. What I've seen over the last, decades, especially post the 90s and the mid 90s, that in terms of political parties approaching business, there has been a consensus that yes, business and investment is important. So in a closed door forum like this, I would say when it comes to an economic policy or our economic policies, both the BJP and the Congress party, the two big parties, are very much aligned when it comes to thinking about tax reforms and investment reforms. So there has been a political understanding which has come. I can understand the pace is slow and therefore sometimes frustrating. But in the country with the size and scale of India, things happen slowly. But the last, now the last obstacle where I see is overcoming the bureaucracy's mindset towards business. And that's where you see the challenges are. Look at the way we are framing our challenges. We are not framing the challenges in terms of a political party having an opposition to business. We're not framing the challenges in terms of a political party stopping the investment or having an anti-foreign investment approach. We're talking about the rules and laws which have been set up over over decades, and the way our bureaucracy is structured across multiple departments and therefore the different permits. So I think this is the last crack that we need, not only for business but also promoting, healthcare or education, to how to modernize our bureaucracy and work in the 21st century. So it's not a societal approach, it's not a political approach. What we need is governance and administrative reforms. We've managed to do that in the past when it comes to Aadhaar, which is giving everyone a unique identity number. Not a simple exercise, but done excellently well. And more needs to be done. When it comes to the second case, I'm quite happy that there is a summit that is taking place. The idea that I'm pushing forward, that not everything needs to happen at a central government to central government level. India is like the EU. We have states which are of the size and economies of countries, and each state being at a different stage of their development and different needs. So therefore, what we need is also for states to come out for maybe a Tamil Nadu Germany partnership, for maybe a Maharashtra Netherlands partnership, for a West Bengal Bangladesh partnership. So we have to create that freedom and flexibility in our governance for our state governments to take the lead, because I don't believe everything needs to happen at a central to central level. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question, Pranav, would you like to ask the question, Pranav Joshi?
Yes, sir. Namaskar, Gogoiji. I'm Pranav Joshi from Jaipur, Rajasthan, and I happen to be a student as of now. My question as a student of political science is that opposition is vital to any democracy. And how does the non-presence of an official leader of opposition as mandated by our constitution stifle the very same idea?
Thanks, Pranav. The role of the opposition is to hold the government accountable to the promises that it made to the people of India, and to hold the government accountable when there are crises that face our country. You understand, in the current context, we face a health crisis, we face an economic unemployment crisis, and we face a national security crisis. And if you look at across the political landscape, if you do a scan of various media stories, the only political party that is asking the right questions, that is asking the tough questions, that is not that is putting forward is my party, and my leader. So the constitutional or the positions aside, India clearly sees that while we are a country of various political parties, various regional parties, right now when it comes to the three big crises, there's only one party which is at the forefront of acting as an opposition, acting the questions, not mincing, not staying silent, not being worried about what impact does it play on the upcoming elections, but playing the role of an opposition. And I think in time, while we might not win the contest of electoral popularity, I think in time history will be kinder and will look upon my party's role as an opposition, as a constructive opposition. It will look upon my party's role in this era much more positively.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for answering that. There is a question in the chat box, if I can just read it out. It's from Dr. Amit Kumar Tiwari. His question actually is very interesting. It says, why are we way behind on innovations as far as indigenous research and technology is concerned? Is there any policy change required in an approach? If so, what and how do you see this?
Thanks. First of all, when it comes to innovation and why is it tough, I think Dr. Suri and Harshji are better people to talk about that. They've faced a considerable amount of challenges across various state governments and multiple political dispensations, so they understand better. But sitting from where I am, I must say, when it comes to research, I'll just focus on research as a component. My experience with the education sector is that too little of our budget is put or isn't invested in the education sector and in the healthcare sector. Our budget also grew a lot post the 90s economic reforms. And we got a lot of funding for the healthcare and the education sector, actually in the late 90s, early 2000 onwards. What we saw as an approach of the government at that time in the last decade or 2 decades before is that it was not good education and good healthcare was not accessible to everyone. People would have to walk for miles. People would have to move to different cities or towns in want of better education, better healthcare, because simply the infrastructure was not there. So most of the time in the 2000 decade and the years following 2000 was spent in creating the infrastructure. So you got more schools, you have bigger schools, wider schools, more hospitals, more primary healthcare centers. So the infrastructure itself was built in the rural India in that era, and that was only possible because we had the economic growth to kind of finance that push in rural India through our healthcare and our education. Now that we've created the necessary infrastructure, we are focusing on the softer side, which is the quality of education, on the quality of healthcare. So looking at doctors, looking at on research, and here is I feel that whether many governments, both at the national and central, state level, are realizing that research is a very critical piece, and therefore are beginning to put money behind it. But there's a lot more money to be put in behind it, and there's a lot of innovation that can be done not only by our IITs but also by our state colleges in a state like Rajasthan or a state like Assam. So, like the way with research and innovation, I think public representatives, chief ministers, prime ministers, they have to really, in the push, they really have to push for research and innovation. And if they send out the right signals, I think the bureaucracy and the world of academia will also respond. Of course, at the end of all of this is the necessary budget, is the necessary finance, and therefore the necessity of having a strong economic growth plan.
Thank you. There was a question on education policy, but you've answered that. So with that, let me hand over the thing to Mr. Neotia for his concluding remarks and thanks. Mr. Neotia.
Well, just to say thank you, Gaurav. Thank you very much for a wide swath of issues that you covered today very comprehensively. It was truly very informative and enjoyable. I want to wish you all the best for the monsoon session and for various other initiatives that your party is doing. And thank you for joining us at this forum. It's unfortunate that we have to meet virtually, but we hope that maybe by December, when you come for the winter session, we will be able to meet physically, maybe have a cup of tea together at the FICCI, which is long overdue. We need to introduce you to our new chairman also, Mr. Bhupendra Yadav. So that is not that you need introduction to him, but just as a formality from the FICCI side. So thank you very much, Gaurav. Thank you, Mr. Rimel. Thank you, Mr. Madan. And thank you for all the support that GAS is giving to FICCI. Thank you, Didi. Thank you very much for being the pillar that you are. And thank you, Team FICCI, Dilip, Manish, and Daulat, and others. Thank you very much. And thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.